The Zetharian Empire had crushed 17 different star systems, and they had never lost a single battle in any of those wars. Their way of fighting was simple, and it worked every single time. They would bring so many ships that the enemy could not win, and then they would attack with perfect timing and overwhelming power. When their scout ships found humans living on the third planet orbiting a normal yellow star, the leaders of the Empire did not even need to think about it for very long. The humans would become the 18th prize in their collection of conquered worlds, and it would be easy. Commander Vexthor stood on the main bridge of his flagship called the Eternal Dominion, and he looked out at the 300 warships that followed his command. This was the largest group of military vessels that the Zetharian Empire had ever put together for a single mission. The information they had collected about the humans showed that these creatures had barely learned how to travel in their own solar system, and they still used old chemical rockets and basic fusion reactors that were not very powerful. The commander knew this battle would be finished quickly, and the humans would not stand a chance against his forces. On Earth, the warning came at 3:47 in the morning according to the time zone in Greenwich. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was working the final hour of his night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station located in the desert of Nevada when suddenly every computer screen in the entire building started showing contacts. He stared at the numbers on his screen because they seemed impossible, and then he reached over and grabbed the emergency communication device. He spoke into it with a voice that was trying to stay calm, but anyone listening could hear the fear underneath. He said, "This is Station 7 and we have multiple bogies," and he repeated it again, saying, "We have multiple unknown contacts entering the outer solar system." Within 60 minutes, President Helen Carter was sitting in the Situation Room that was buried deep beneath the White House, and she was surrounded by her top military advisors and the best scientists in the country. Everyone in the room became completely silent when the satellite images came through on the main screen. The pictures showed hundreds of alien ships, and each one of them was several kilometers long, and they were all moving in perfect formation as they headed straight toward Earth. General Paul Bennett was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he was the first person to speak. He said, "Madam President, we need to assume these aliens are coming here to attack us, and I recommend that we activate Protocol Blackout right now and begin all of our planetary defense procedures immediately." Dr. Lisa Park was the civilian director of the Space Defense Initiative, and she nodded her head in a way that showed she agreed, but also showed she was worried. She said, "Our computer simulations never planned for an invasion force of this size, and we have 72 orbital defense platforms and 24 strike cruisers and the Kennedy Station railgun network, but against this many enemy ships we are looking at odds of approximately 300 to 1. Helen Carter sat up straighter in her chair and her face showed determination. She said, "Then we will make every single shot count," and she turned to General Bennett and told him to bring all of their forces to full readiness. She told Dr. Park that she wanted every weapon system they had charged and ready to fire. She also said someone needed to get her a communication line to the other world leaders, because if the aliens were coming to attack Earth, then they were coming for all of humanity, and not just one country. Up above, Earth in orbit, the international fleet began getting ready for battle. Captain Greg Foster received his orders while he was aboard the ESS Defender, which was humanity's newest warship that had just been completed at the orbital shipyards. His crew of 215 people rushed to their battle stations, and every single one of them knew they were about to face an enemy that was far more powerful than anything they had trained for in all their exercises and simulations. In his private ready room, Greg pulled up the tactical displays on his computer screens. The alien fleet had stopped moving when they reached the orbit of Saturn, and now they were just holding their position there. They were waiting for something. He pressed the button to activate his communication system so he could talk to everyone on his ship. He said, "All hands, this is the captain speaking, and you have all seen the sensor readings by now. We are outnumbered, and the enemy has better weapons than we do, but we are not outmatched in spirit or determination. Humanity has faced extinction before in our history, and we survived every time. Today we are going to show these invaders exactly why Earth has never fallen to any foreign power that tried to conquer us. Everyone get to your battle stations now. This is Foster out," and he ended the transmission. The Zetharian commander watched the weak human response on his tactical screens, and he felt something close to amusement. Their largest military vessels were barely the same size as a small Zetharian corvette, which was one of the smallest ship types in his fleet. Their weapons were old-fashioned kinetic accelerators that threw metal projectiles and some early plasma cannons that were not very powerful. This battle would be over in just a few hours and probably less time than that. But Commander Vexthor made his first mistake in that moment. He underestimated the huge advantage that comes from fighting to defend your own home territory, and he did not understand the incredible, desperate ingenuity that humans show when they have their backs against the wall and no way to retreat. The Zetharians had won 17 wars, but they had never fought anyone like humanity before. They had never faced a species that would rather die fighting than accept slavery. They had never encountered an enemy that became more dangerous when you cornered them instead of less dangerous. The alien fleet began moving forward from Saturn toward Earth, and the sensors on every human ship and station tracked their approach. In command centers across the planet, military officers watched the screens and waited for orders. In cities around the world, people looked up at the sky even though they could not see the alien ships yet. Everyone knew that something had changed forever. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and the neighbors who had finally arrived were not coming in peace. They were coming with weapons and conquest on their minds, but they did not know what humans were capable of when pushed to the edge. The battle began when the sun was rising over the Pacific Ocean. The Zetharian fleet swept in like a red tide of death, and their shields were shimmering as they absorbed energy from the sun. The aliens expected to hear panic broadcasts from Earth, and they thought maybe the humans would fire a few desperate shots before they gave up and surrendered. Instead, they got Kennedy Station. Major Chris Walker was in command of the orbital weapons platform, which was a rotating ring structure that held 60 railguns positioned in a high Earth orbit. When the alien vanguard crossed past the lunar orbit, he gave a simple order that would change everything. He said, "All batteries fire now." The railguns sang out their deadly song. Hypervelocity tungsten rods that each weighed 2 tons shot out of the barrels and accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. They crossed the distance between the station and the alien ships in just seconds. The Zetharians had shields that were designed to deflect energy weapons and disperse plasma attacks. They were not prepared at all for simple kinetic impacts at such incredibly high speeds. 12 ships in the alien vanguard simply stopped, existing as they were punched through by projectiles that hit with the same force as tactical nuclear weapons. Another 8 ships spiraled away from the formation, while trailing atmosphere and debris from massive holes in their hulls. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, alarm systems started shrieking and making terrible sounds. Commander Vexthor stared at his tactical display, and his face showed complete disbelief. 20 ships had been destroyed or crippled. 20 ships lost in the very first attack wave to a species that should not have been able to even scratch the paint on Zetharian shields. He shouted, "Return fire immediately, and all ships need to start evasive maneuvers right now." He demanded that someone explain to him how the humans penetrated their shields with such primitive weapons. The Zetharian fleet scattered and broke formation as they replied with their own weapons. Lance beams of coherent energy reached out across the darkness of space, and they struck Kennedy Station with devastating power. The platform's shields flared bright and then died completely. Then the structure itself began to break apart under the sustained assault. Major Walker and his crew of 83 people died while still firing their weapons. They managed to take down 4 more alien vessels before the station exploded in a massive ball of superheated metal and debris. But the delay cost the Zetharians their perfect formation that they always used. Earth's defense fleet struck from 3 different vectors all at once. Captain Greg Foster brought the Defender in low and fast while skimming along the upper atmosphere to use Earth's magnetic field as cover from sensors. His tactical officer was Lieutenant Amy Price, and she was coordinating targeting data across the entire fleet using quantum communication links. She said, "Multiple locks confirmed, Captain, and we have firing solutions on their heavy cruisers." Greg said, "Fire all tubes and give them everything we have got." The Defender shuddered and shook as 20 missile tubes opened at the same time. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes streaked toward the alien formation, and they were joined by hundreds more missiles from the rest of the human fleet. The Zetharians tried to shoot the missiles down with point defense weapons, but humanity had learned from decades of studying missile defense theory. For every missile that got intercepted, 2 more got through the defensive fire. The void of space filled with nuclear fire and bright flashes. 30 more alien ships died or were crippled badly in this second exchange. But the cost was terrible for humanity. The Zetharian counterattack was precise and overwhelming in its power. Earth's ships were valiant and their crews were brave, but they were outmatched in firepower. The ships began to die one by one. The ESS Freedom exploded with all hands lost. The Asian Alliance cruiser Shanghai broke in half and both pieces tumbled away into space. The European vessel Berlin fell burning down into the atmosphere like a meteor. On the bridge of the Defender, damage reports were flooding in from all over the ship. Lieutenant Kevin Ross was at the engineering station, and he shouted over the chaos that they had lost main power to all the forward sections. He said hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, and casualties are mounting fast. Greg Foster refused to retreat even though his ship was dying. He asked Amy if they still had any weapons. She checked her console and said aft missile tubes are functional and railgun turret 3 is responding to commands. He said then we are still in this fight, and he told her to target that flagship. He ordered all remaining weapons to fire. The Defender was dying but still defiant. It sent its last missiles screaming toward the Eternal Dominion. 2 of them struck home and they overwhelmed a weakened shield section before tearing a massive wound in the alien flagship's hull. Commander Vexthor found himself thrown from his command station when his ship lurched violently to one side. He demanded a damage report immediately. His officer said primary reactor is destabilizing and weapons grid is offline. Sections 12 through 18 are venting atmosphere into space. The commander felt his blood run cold in his veins. The humans were supposed to be primitive and easy prey. Instead, they had bloodied the greatest fleet in all of Zetharian history. Already he had lost over 70 ships. The assault should have been finished by now with the humans begging for mercy. He gave the order to pull back to Saturn orbit and reform the fleet. He said they would prepare for siege bombardment instead. If they could not take the human world cleanly, then they would scour it from orbit with long-range weapons. As the Zetharian fleet withdrew, Earth counted its losses, and the numbers were devastating. Of the 24 strike cruisers that started the battle, only 6 remained operational. 40,000 personnel were dead. Kennedy Station was gone. The orbital platforms were burning wreckage. The defense grid had huge gaps in it now, but they had held their ground. Against impossible odds that should have crushed them, humanity had survived the first wave of attack and sent the invaders running backward. The aliens were retreating and regrouping. In the White House, President Carter received the casualty reports and her heart was heavy with grief for all the people who had died. Then she looked at her military advisors with hard eyes. She said they expected us to break under pressure, but we did not. Now show me how we hurt them again and make them regret coming to our solar system. Commander Vexthor made his second critical mistake after the first battle. He assumed the humans would stay close to their homeworld and defend it, while waiting for the inevitable final assault. He did not understand that humanity's greatest strategic advantage was not their weapons or their defenses or their technology. It was their absolute refusal to fight in predictable ways. 3 days after the first battle, Major Julie Bennett led her squadron of stealth strike fighters on what everyone knew was probably a suicide mission. The Zetharians had pulled back to establish a siege position near Saturn, and they were bombarding Earth with long-range weapons while they repaired their damaged ships in relative safety. They did not expect the humans to come out and attack them in their own territory. Julie spoke into her communication system and said, Alpha Squadron, this is Shadowbird 1, and maintain radio silence and follow my lead. She told them they would get one pass at this target, and they needed to make it count. The 12 fighters drifted cold and silent through space while running on minimal power to avoid being detected by enemy sensors. They had launched from the hidden lunar base called Jackson Crater, and they were coasting on ballistic trajectories that looked exactly like debris from the first battle. It took them 50 hours of silent drifting to reach the alien formation. Julie watched her tactical display very carefully as they approached the Zetharian repair ships. These were massive factory vessels that were currently rebuilding the damaged warships. Intelligence reports suggested these vessels were lightly defended because the Zetharians considered them too valuable to risk putting them in direct combat situations. Intelligence was right this time. Julie said, all fighters, weapons hot and target the repair. Docks and light them up now. 12 fighters suddenly came to life and blazed with power as they accelerated, hard toward the unprotected supply vessels. Missiles and railgun fire tore into the repair ships before the Zetharians could even react to what was happening. Massive explosions rippled through The enemy fleet as fuel stores and ammunition depots cooked, often detonated in chain reactions. Julie pulled her fighter through a hard turn and felt the G-forces crush her into her seat despite the inertial dampeners working at maximum. She said, "That is for Kennedy Station, you bastards." She told Alpha Squadron to break formation and scatter and go evasive and run for the extraction point. 5 fighters made it back to Luna safely. 7 did not return, and those pilots were listed as killed in action, but they had crippled the Zetharian repair capability and bought Earth precious time to prepare for the next phase. On Earth itself, the counteroffensive was taking shape in unexpected ways that the aliens could never have predicted. Dr. Nathan Cole stood in a laboratory that was buried deep beneath the mountains of Colorado. He was staring at pieces of alien hull plating that had been recovered from the destroyed Zetharian ships that fell into Earth's atmosphere. He muttered to himself that it was amazing. He told his assistant, Dr. Claire Hudson, that the alien metallurgy was centuries ahead of human technology, but the underlying principles were exactly the same. And that meant something very important. Claire finished his thought and said, "We can adapt our weapons to exploit the weaknesses in their armor." She said, "Nathan, if we can retrofit even a fraction of our remaining missiles with these penetrator tips, then we could turn this whole war around." Within 48 hours, every munitions factory on Earth was retooling their production lines. The crashed alien vessels became a treasure trove of intelligence and technology. Humanity learned and adapted and evolved their tactics at a pace that shocked the Zetharian observers who were watching from a distance. Commander Vexthor reviewed the latest damage reports with growing unease and worry. The humans were not supposed to be able to strike at his rear elements and supply lines. They were not supposed to adapt this quickly to new situations. Every tactical doctrine in the Zetharian military assumed that technological superiority would always lead to swift victory over primitive species. But these humans fought like cornered animals. They struck from unexpected angles and used their intimate knowledge of their own solar system to set ambushes and conduct hit-and-run attacks. They mined asteroid fields with hidden explosives. They hid weapons platforms in the rings of Saturn, where sensors could not detect them easily. They launched attacks with such reckless abandon that his forces could not predict what their next move would be. One of his officers reported that another supply convoy had been destroyed. The officer said the humans somehow knew their patrol routes ahead of time. Vexthor slammed his appendage against the console in frustration. He demanded to know how the humans were intercepting their military communications. What the commander did not know was that an 18-year-old computer prodigy named Danny Wright was working from his bedroom in California. Danny was coordinating with a global network of hackers and signals intelligence specialists. Together they had cracked the basics of Zetharian encryption protocols. It was not elegant work, and they could only decode about 30% of enemy transmissions. But that 30% told them where the Zetharians were not looking and where their weak points were, and that information was enough to make a difference. As Earth entered its 3rd week under siege, the human spirit remained completely unbroken despite all the losses. In Shanghai, factory workers built missile components around the clock without sleeping. In São Paulo, volunteers signed up for the defense forces faster than the military could train them. In Lagos, engineers developed new drone swarm tactics that could overwhelm alien point defenses. In Moscow, military planners refined strategies for the coming battles using data from every engagement. President Carter addressed the entire world in a broadcast that was heard in every home and every shelter and every military installation on the planet. She said they came here to conquer us, and they came expecting us to kneel before them and surrender. But they did not understand what it means to be human. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the most advanced technologically, but we are survivors. We are innovators. We are the species that looked up at the stars and decided they were ours to claim someday. And we will not surrender our home to anyone who comes here with hostile intentions. On the Eternal Dominion, Commander Vexthor made a decision that would determine the fate of his entire fleet. He would commit every ship he had left to one final overwhelming assault. No more caution, no more siege tactics. They would burn through Earth's defenses in a single devastating strike and end this humiliating conflict once and for all. He did not realize he was making his final and most fatal mistake. Captain Greg Foster stood on the hastily repaired bridge of the Defender and studied the holographic display of the solar system. Earth's remaining military leadership had been arguing for 3 days about what to do next. Some wanted to fortify Earth orbit for a last stand. Others suggested evacuating key personnel to the outer colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. Greg had a different idea. It was a crazy and desperate idea, but it just might work. He said to the assembled officers in the virtual war room that the aliens think we are beaten. He said they think we are huddling around Earth and waiting for the end. What if we are not there when they arrive? Admiral Susan Drake was commanding what remained of Earth's space forces from the lunar base, and she leaned forward. She told him to explain his idea. Greg said, "We have been studying their tactics for 3 weeks now." He said they are methodical, and they establish dominance through overwhelming force at a single point. Every battle they have ever fought followed the same pattern, which is concentrate forces and crush resistance, and then occupy the conquered territory. They have done it 17 times across 17 different star systems. General Marcus Riley from Earth Defense Command said, "And so what does that mean for us?" Greg continued and said they are going to do it again. He said intelligence suggests they are massing for a final push at Earth. Every ship they have left will come at us all in one thrust. They will come in fast and hard while expecting to sweep aside whatever we have left defending the planet. Lieutenant Amy Price was now his executive officer, and she caught on to the plan first. She said, "So we do not meet them at Earth. We let them commit to the attack and then hit them from behind." Greg nodded his head and said exactly right. He explained that they would stage their entire fleet at the asteroid belt. Every ship and every weapons platform they could make mobile would go there. They would leave only automated defenses at Earth. When the aliens committed to the assault on the planet, then the human fleet would jump them from behind and destroy them while they were focused on the planetary defenses. Admiral, Drake said it is very risky. She said if they detect our fleet movement, then they will adapt their strategy. Greg countered and said, "But if they do not detect us, then we get one shot at ending this war in a single engagement." The plan was approved by the military leadership. Over the next week, every functional human warship quietly relocated to positions in the asteroid belt. The movement was disguised as debris and covered by the largest electronic warfare operation humanity had ever attempted. Every radar decoy and every false signal and every trick they had learned was employed to make it look like the fleet was still defending Earth. Commander Vexthor saw exactly what he expected to see: a broken and desperate enemy clinging to their homeworld. His strategic officers reported minimal fleet presence in Earth orbit, which was just as their predictions had suggested. The humans had pulled everything back for a final defense of their planet. He said, "Excellent, and we will end this farce now." He ordered all ships to prepare for the final assault. He said maximum speed and full weapons deployment. He told his fleet they would break through the human defenses and subjugate their world in a single day. The Zetharian armada, which now numbered 223 vessels, accelerated toward Earth in a massive formation. They came in with shields at maximum power and weapons charged, and fully confident in their numerical superiority over the primitive humans. The automated defense platforms around Earth opened fire as they were programmed to do. They sent waves of missiles and railgun fire into the alien formation. The Zetharians weathered the assault and lost only a handful of ships. Their return fire methodically destroyed each platform one by one. Vexthor watched with satisfaction as the human defenses crumbled before his fleet. He said land forces prepare for deployment. He told them they would occupy the human capital cities within the day. That was when the trap sprung shut. From 3 vectors in the asteroid belt, humanity's entire remaining fleet emerged at maximum burn. They had been waiting cold and silent for this exact moment. The Zetharians were committed now. Their ships were pointed toward Earth, and their formation was spread out to envelope the planet. Greg Foster gave the order. He said all ships weapons free and fire at will. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment the siege of Earth ended. Humanity's ships were outnumbered 2-1, but they were fighting with the fury of a species defending its home. They tore into the Zetharian rearguard with everything they had. The aliens tried to reform their fleet. They tried to turn and meet this new threat, but they were caught in the worst possible position. Their forward elements were engaged with Earth's orbital defenses. Their rear was under assault from the human fleet, and they were spread too thin across space to concentrate their fire effectively. Captain Greg Foster stood on the bridge of the Defender and called out targets as fast as his weapons crews could engage them. He said, "Amy, I need firing solutions on those heavy cruisers on the port side of their formation." She said, "Locked and tracking and firing now." The Defender shuddered as its main railguns fired in sequence. Tungsten penetrators punched through the hulls of 2 Zetharian cruisers. Around them, the rest of the human fleet was doing the same thing. They exploited every weakness they had learned. They hit every vulnerability they had discovered in 3 weeks of desperate combat. On the Eternal Dominion, panic was setting in among the crew. An officer reported that they were taking casualties across the entire fleet. He said, "The human weapons have been modified and they are punching through our shields now." Commander Vexthor stared at the tactical display with absolute horror. This was not possible. The humans were winning. His mighty armada, which was the greatest force the Zetharian Empire had ever assembled, was being torn apart by a species they had expected to conquer in a single day. He said, "All ships, fall back and regroup at the outer system boundary." An explosion rocked the flagship before he could finish giving orders. The Defender had focused every weapon it had on the Eternal Dominion. The command ship's shields collapsed under the sustained fire. Then its hull began to rupture and split open. Commander Vexthor had time for one final thought before the bridge decompressed into the vacuum of space. They had underestimated these humans, and it had cost them everything they had. The battle lasted 14 hours of continuous fighting. When it was finally over, the Zetharian armada had been reduced to just 17 fleeing vessels that were running away as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. Earth's fleet was battered badly with only 31 ships still capable of pursuit, but they were victorious. President Helen Carter stood in the Situation Room and watched the tactical displays as the last alien ships fled beyond the orbit of Pluto. The room was completely silent because everyone was trying to process what they had just witnessed. Humanity, which was the underdog and the primitive species that should have been conquered, in a single day had defeated the greatest military force in that region of the galaxy. General Paul Bennett broke the silence. He said, "Madam President, should we pursue the remaining enemy ships?" Helen considered the question for a long moment and then shook her head. She said no and let them run. She said, "Let them go home and tell their empire what happened here. We have made our point clear." She turned to the communications officer. She asked if they could get a message to those retreating ships. The officer said, "Yes, ma'am, and they will receive it." Helen said, "Good, and send this message." The message was simple, and it was translated into the Zetharian language, using the linguistic data they had captured from destroyed vessels. It would reach the remnants of the alien fleet within the hour, and eventually it would reach the Zetharian Empire itself. The message said to the Zetharian Empire, and any others who might be watching, "Earth is not yours to take. We did not seek this war, but we will finish any war brought to our doorstep. Return to your worlds in peace, and we will meet you as friends. Come again as conquerors, and you will meet the same fate as this fleet. Humanity stands ready to join the galactic community, but we will do so as equals and never as subjects. This is our only warning." 3 weeks later, the surviving Zetharian vessels limped into their home system. The High Command gathered to hear the report of Subcommander Kethryn, who was the highest-ranking survivor of the Armada. Kethryn said, "The humans are far more dangerous than our intelligence suggested." The subcommander's voice was still trembling as he spoke. He said, "They fight with a ferocity we have never encountered in any of our previous conquests. They adapt in real time to changing battle conditions. They use tactics we have never seen before. They take casualties that would break any other species, and they keep fighting anyway. And most terrifyingly, they learn from every single engagement." The High Commander of the Zetharian Empire listened to the full report in complete silence. 300 ships had been sent to conquer one primitive world. Only 17 returned home. It was the worst military disaster in their entire history. The High Commander asked, "What is your recommendation, Subcommander?" Kethryn did not hesitate with the answer. He said, "We leave them alone." He said, "Quarantine their system and mark it as forbidden territory. In 50 years or perhaps 100 years, they will have advanced enough to join us on equal terms. But we do not provoke them again under any circumstances. The humans are not prey like we assumed. They are predators, and they defend their territory with absolute ruthlessness." The order went out across the entire Zetharian Empire. Human space was now forbidden. No fleet would approach Earth. The coordinates would be marked as a hazard zone on all navigation charts. But the Empire did more than just that. They sent a message to every species in their database and every civilization they had ever contacted. It was a simple warning, and it was accompanied by tactical data from the failed invasion. The message said the species designation, human, has proven to possess exceptional martial capability, despite primitive technology level. They employ asymmetric warfare tactics with extreme effectiveness. They demonstrate remarkable adaptability and refuse to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. Classification upgraded to dangerous and do not engage. On Earth, Captain Greg Foster stood on the rebuilt Kennedy Station and looked down at the blue marble of his homeworld. The repairs would take years to complete. The casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Entire cities had been damaged by the long-range bombardment during the siege, but they had survived. And more than that, they had proven something important to the universe. Lieutenant Amy Price joined him at the observation window. She asked, "What are you thinking about, Captain?" Greg smiled slightly. He said, "I am thinking about what comes next." He said, "They will leave us alone now, at least for a while. But this war changed everything. We are not isolated anymore. We are part of something bigger whether we are ready or not." Amy asked, "Do you think they will come back someday?" Greg said maybe, and probably, but not for a long time. And when they do come back, we will be ready. We will be stronger and more advanced, and we will have the one advantage they will never have. She asked, "What is that?" He said, "We will still be the species that looked at the most powerful force ever sent against us and decided to fight anyway. That is the thing about humans, Amy. We do not know when to quit, and that makes us the most dangerous species in the galaxy." Below them, Earth turned slowly in space. It was scarred but unbroken. Humanity had been tested in fire and emerged stronger from the ordeal. The message had been sent to the stars. Earth was defended and humanity would not be conquered. The Zetharian armada had come to subjugate a primitive species. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. They had united humanity and given them a common purpose. They had forced humans to reach beyond their limitations. They had created a unified and determined humanity that was now ready to claim its place among the stars. And across the galaxy, civilizations that heard the story of Earth's defense added a new rule to their first contact protocols. Approach the humans with caution and respect, and above all, never approach them as conquerors, because the greatest force ever sent against humanity had tried that approach, and it never returned home victorious.